Hello and welcome to today's webcast hosted by the Sales Management Association. Our session will start in just a few minutes. I have a few very brief announcements first. Please note that we will not open attendees' audio or video lines during our broadcast today, but we do very much welcome your questions and comments and encourage you to submit those by just clicking onto the video display window that you see on our webpage right now. You'll see that small text link that will flip you over into the chat window, and you can submit your questions and comments there. You can also email those to us if you'd like at support@salesmanagement.org, and I'll remind you during our session. I'll have this little banner scooting along the bottom of the screen there to remind you of that email and the other ways of submitting your questions. Also, please note, we'll be recording our session today. We'll make it available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library. And our members will also be able to download slides from our session from our website there. I'm Bob Kelly. I'm Sales Management Association Chairman. Today, I'm pleased to talk to you a little bit about some research and some practitioner insights related to territory design. Before we do that, in case you're new to the Sales Management Association, let me point out that we are a global cross-industry professional association for sales operations, sales effectiveness, commercial excellence, rev ops, and sales leadership positions. We provide members with networking, some great content, learning resources, and all kinds of additional professional development opportunities. If you're not already a member of the Sales Management Association, while you're here, we'd encourage you to consider membership. You can take a look around on our site and learn more about membership. So with that said, let's get started with our session today. The topic is going to be quite interesting. We're talking about sales territory design. I'm joined by an excellent co-presenter I'd like to introduce now. Let's see. So my co-presenter is Ronan Kilroy from eSpatial. Ronan is head of revenue for eSpatial, a firm that markets a mapping software platform for sales, marketing, and operations. Ronan's 30 years experience includes 12 years running his own sales consultancy focused in Salesforce transformation. So it's great to have you with us, Ronan Kilroy. I'll welcome you to the stage. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Bob. Looking forward to it.
I'll also point out that we have a panel of experts who will be providing expert commentary along the way in our session today, and you'll look forward to hearing from them. I'll also look forward to introducing them when we get to those segments. So let's get started with our topic today, which is solving the three most common challenges to effective sales territory design. If I may, I want to start with just the briefest of overviews on the topic. So I think the first question you might reasonably ask is it worth investing in sales territory design and the care and trouble required to optimize sales territories? We have research that points out the advantages that accrue to those firms that do have effective sales territory design. We know those firms are 71% of them meet the firm sales objective. And this is compared to just 45% of firms who say that their sales territory design efforts are ineffective. So there's an advantage that accrues to firms on related to overall firm productivity. And we also see that salespeople within those firms that are effective in territory design are much more likely to be effective as well. 61% of salespeople in firms that have effective territories met their individual sales goal, and that's compared to just 43% of salespeople in firms who have ineffective sales territories. Think for a moment of the compounding virtues related to having more people achieving quota in your organization. Of course, it makes the organization more productive, but it also makes it a nicer place to work, allows you to attract more talent, et cetera, et cetera. Now, The other thing to point out in our overview, the second thing, is that not everyone is effective in designing sales territories. Despite these great advantages, we know from our research that only 42% of firms self-describe their territory design efforts as effective. Sales territory design is important. It has advantages for doing it well, but it is difficult. So with that said, let's welcome Ronan again. And Ronan, we're going to hear from our expert panel in a moment, but any thoughts on what we've talked about so far and just sort of the overview of this topic?
Yeah, I think, well, I think we're going to hear about it too in the upcoming interviews. It's a big challenge for a lot of organizations. They find it very difficult to do and to do well. Hopefully today we'll have some ideas on how you can improve on it. I always remember a guest you've had on a few times, Ken Kramer, and one of his mantras was always that you don't want a territory that rewards the salesperson. You want territories that are balanced and that really optimize the time that people can spend with customers. And so yeah, it's a challenge that we hear about day in, day out. I'm not surprised really by the numbers.
Indeed. Well, without further ado, let's hear from our expert panel. I want to introduce them to you. They bring three different perspectives to this idea of how we use or how firms use territories. So actually, I get rid of my slides. I'm not sure I have the right one anyway. So the first panelist, we have three panelists. They are as follows: Louis Morin from TELUS. He is Vice President of Sales Performance at TELUS, a Canadian telecommunications company based in Vancouver, British Columbia. We'll hear also from Tom Pokornik. He is Vice President, Sales Strategy and Operations at CDK Global, a provider of software solutions to more than 15,000 automotive dealers. Tom was previously head of global sales operations at Amazon Web Services and a senior vice president at Press Ganey. They'll be joined by Padmaja Rao, who manages global sales incentives at Stem Cell Technologies, a broad-based supplier of to scientists around the world working on stem cell immunology, cancer, regenerative medicine, and cellular therapy research. Three very different companies and three unique perspectives. Let's hear from them now.
I work for TELUS. It's a telecommunication company in Canada. I've always been in sales, but in the last 10 years, I've been moved to the head office, and I've been working on a program called Premier Sales Organization, which is basically trying to get our sales professional as best as they can. At TELUS, we have a lot of standardizing process on opportunity management, account management, funnel management, and territory management is probably the hardest one because, if you don't help the salesperson, they're going to be spending a lot of time and effort, making sure that they provide as much data that they can in territory. Territory could be designed in a different way. We have some territory that are based on vertical segment. We break it down by size of business or geographic. That depends on your business. But I think the most important thing I would say in the territory management process is really providing data, providing where to spend it. In an ideal world, we should provide a plan to the account manager saying these are your 50 account and these are the 20 account that should bring you the most of your business. Start with them. You should be able to make X amount of call and sell. Having all kind of information around the deal size, the velocity, and that in an ideal world and the account manager should execute the plan. So it's really important that you try to balance your territory, and that's probably the hardest part. But some company like in TELUS, it's difficult because we set the territory and then to move customer around in the system, it's a big deal.
I'm Padmaja Rao, manager for global sales incentive at Stem Cell Technologies. I primarily focus on the sales incentive plan design and administration here for our sales team. I work a little bit with the HR, a little bit with the finance, sort of try to collaborate and make sure things go smoothly between all the teams. Um, we roughly have 350 sales employees, and we kind of try to make sure that we have a smooth, year throughout from the beginning till the end. We are doing things right. So be it territories, targets, or the sales incentive, just trying to make sure things are all connected and go on smoothly. I think every time we talk about territory design, there's always like the best practices, but I think there's something also like what works best for your organization, and there's this fine line between the two. So for us, I think we are not like doing things the best, but what we are doing right now works for us. We try to work a lot with our sales managers, but at the same time, try to provide them with all the data that they need to help them make those decisions and help them carve those territories out for their sales rep.
So I'm Tom Pokornik, and I lead sales strategy and operations for an automotive SaaS company. We provide solutions to automotive dealers around the United States and in North America. We utilize, territory planning on an annual basis, as most sales ops and sales leaders do. We're really focused on trying to be as efficient as we possibly can. So ultimately, what that means is we are trying to make sure that we have really compact territories for travel distance, so that they really have a good understanding of the market. We're not asking for people to travel too far outside of areas that they live, and just being on the road too much. And then, the other part of it is we're trying to balance the amount of opportunity, so what we call customer potential or white space, along with the amount of revenue that we're trying to balance, so that we don't have someone that's overloaded while the next territory over is really light. And we'd like to balance that out as much as possible. But taking all those things into account, we have a regular territory optimization process that we do all of that, updating the white space, updating obviously the revenue, the number of accounts, and the travel compactness of that territory each year.
Get my co-presenter added back. So this helps us understand a little bit about what's going on with territory design in these three companies. So obviously this is a multifaceted issue. A lot of things coming together at once. It's what I would refer to as an integrative discipline. And we're beginning to get a little bit of an inkling as to why it's difficult in many firms. I do want to share some additional insight, though, from our research, and I'll have Ronan help me with this, that helps us answer the question, why is this hard? So here's a chart from our most recent research report, and it shows essentially that one reason it's hard is that companies are trying to do a lot with their efforts in territory design. By its very nature, territory optimization is attempting to accomplish multiple things at once. These things relate to covering customers, prospects, but also being efficient in the way we have people driving. It includes economizing expense and also making sure things are equitably distributed. Now, we also know from our research that firms are unlikely to be effective in many of these very same things. So there's quite a gap here between what's important to organizations. And consider that in this list, there are 8 things that at least half of all organizations consider important. But there are only a few things that more than half are actually executing well on. So this is very, very difficult. Ronan, is this consistent with what you see with your clients at eSpatial.
Yeah, very much so, and I think it's actually even consistent there with what Bob said, because I wrote again what he had said himself. I mean, there's, what is it, nine priorities there. It seems like that's a lot, but he was saying that, you know, the biggest challenge for them was the balancing of existing customers with these white space revenue opportunities, and trying to make sure that they iron out the imbalances. And I mean, even just to achieve those two objectives alone is a challenge, with notwithstanding the fact that there's another 7 on the board. So I do think it's yeah, when you see that graph, you go, that's a lot to take on.
Indeed. So what we want to focus on today, though, are 3 things that we call out as most important. And these, again, come directly from our research in this area, sales territory effectiveness. The 3 things that we believe are markers of effectiveness, that is, among the companies that are effective in sales territory design, they're doing these 3 things well. And the 3 things are securing the right data. So having the right data dramatically improves the chances of success, territory optimization. Secondly, they're designing territories with the right frequency. And thirdly, they're using technology in ways that greatly assist their ability to be effective in territory design. So we're going to start with the first thing, which is the right data. So let's take a look and just drill down a little bit into this idea. So I want to show you, it's again from the research. This is a chart that shows firms that are ineffective in securing various data inputs. You can see the data inputs on the horizontal axis of this chart. They include data on salesperson activity, data on potential, data on the amount of capacity their salespeople have. It even includes first line manager input. The point here is that when firms are unable to secure this data, they have a very low probability of being effective in sales territory design. Now, this is by their own estimation. They're self-reporting their effectiveness, and they're self-reporting their ability to access these things. But it's clear that there's a direct relationship between inability to get the data and low or poor outcomes in effectiveness. Now, we can see also, and in fact, let me build out the rest of the chart, that firms that are effective in securing inputs, the same inputs, have a much greater chance of being effective. In some cases, 3 times more likely are these firms to be effective in sales territory design. So this is, we run the risk of being perhaps too obvious here, but it's just important to emphasize the table stakes nature of access to good data. Our challenge today will be to help you figure out how to get that. But we wanted to provide this sort of research-based support first for why you should make it a priority. Keep in mind also that 2 categories of data seem to be most important here. They are related to potential estimation and data related to salesperson activity. Your thoughts about this, Ronan?
Yeah, and again, I'm gonna quote, and I really hope I pronounce her name correctly, Padmaja, because
she helped me. It's Padmaja, yeah.
Padmaja, I apologize if you're listening. But I think she's right, because she mentioned this clash between best practices and what works best. It's very common to hear companies say that they don't have the customer potential data, but it isn't. It may be a challenge to get. It is ideally the best practice. We will cover some ideas here, but sometimes there's 4 categories up here. Even to achieve progress in one of these can have a significant impact. But obviously, any inroads you can make it to just. I do think, Bob, it's worth, and I know you're going to do this, explaining that breakout between the activity data and the sales response analysis. But I know you're going to touch on that because they are interlinked.
Yeah, we wanted to clarify what that means, and before we do that though, let's hear again from our expert panel. And the topic this time is the challenges they face in getting the data inputs needed to do territory optimization. Let's hear what they have to say.
We are trying here is to make sure that our customers are getting the best sales support that we can for our different products. We are trying to make sure that we have the territories designed in such a way that our best sales reps are able to support the territories and the customer. Our end goal is always to make sure that the customers getting the support that they need. With that in mind, we let our sales managers make that call of designing the territories. But that's where we also make sure that we are providing them with all the information that they need, and at the same time have also laid out few of few of the important things or process steps, like this is how we want to do things. These are let's start with maybe identifying the key accounts or the strategic accounts, the ones that you want to drive long-term relationship versus other customers that you just want to focus revenue on. So those are the things that we have laid down, and then we just collate all the data, make sure we provide it to our sales managers, and then let them make their decisions so that they can support, because they are more closer to our customers, so they have a better understanding of the groundwork. So we want them to be making that decisions. So that's how we are doing here at Stem Cell.
Again, I think we're working with marketing, you start with your existing base, what type of product do you have in your existing base? So that's identify quickly what else could you sell in your base. And then if it's a new logo, obviously they are available for mostly of your product. You look at the success you've been having also. Where have you been successful in which product? So that should be a good indicator of identifying potential for other customer. So I think that would be my 2 cents to where I would start. Yeah, it is difficult because you have to rely on the information that the salespeople are willing to share. But again, with territory planning this last year, we launched this new process where we built a template and provide them with data, on their territory, and ask them to build a plan, where you're going to spend your time and all that. And we also created a tool called a reverse engineering tool. It's basically, again, going back to what I was saying about, in your market segment, what's the average sales size, what's the ratio of closing ratio, strike ratio, all that stuff. So we provide them a kind of a calculation process where they can break it down and bring it to the level of activity they should be doing. Now, are they doing it properly? It's very difficult. Again, like I said, we just have to look at success rate and try to benchmark our top achiever, but it's difficult. We do review territory planning plan. Like I said, we build those plans for the first quarter, and then after the first quarter, we review what worked, because they put some specific objective. I'm going to go after this product. I'm going to go after these customers. So we can always review it, but it's still a challenging, activity management is still challenging.
Run into, I would say, a challenge maybe just last year where you don't know how much of the potential is there in the territory, or suddenly, let's say the customer got a lot of funding or they have a lot of revenue to invest into something, and that's when suddenly your smaller customer becomes a bigger customer, right? All of a sudden. So that definitely is a challenge, like predicting when the customer will grow into this big customer. And at the same time, sometimes it's difficult because you don't know if a customer just shuts down. But it happens with biotechs quite often where, one company just shut down in the middle of the quarter, and we were expecting revenue from them, but all of a sudden now we don't have that revenue or that potential. So your territories are all of a sudden, imbalanced. So that's something that we did notice, and it's difficult. That's definitely a challenge. It's difficult to guess how the future with biotechs immediately looks.
So regarding some of the data, we find that customer potential or white space is honestly probably one of the most critical things when it comes to territory optimization. I've personally made every mistake that you can make with calculating customer potential, but I've sort of come up with a methodology over the years. When I started out, the first thing that we were doing was kind of taking third-party data like Dun & Bradstreet and calculating dollars per user or dollars per employee or dollars per business. And what we found was that the sellers and the sales leadership team would say, well, that customer has more sites than that, or they have less employees than that. And so utilizing third-party data, I quickly realized was always going to be a barrier. And so what I developed over the years is essentially an internal process where we use our own customer. We used our the entire universe of, we're in the automotive industry, so we have 19,000 or so dealers that are out there to call on. We know which customers we're working with, and then we know the remainder that are prospects. I know that's not always possible for every industry, but we have this fixed set where we can actually get our hands on all of the different dealers that are out there. And in looking at that, what we do is we say, well, let's look at the customers that we have. Let's look at how much they're actually spending on each one of our products. And then with some statistical tools, but pretty simply, we get like customers together where we group them into like cohorts. And then what we do is we leverage that to say, if this customer looks like this other customer that's in the same cluster or cohort, then they should essentially be spending the same amount on this particular product. And we just do that for all of our products to ultimately get to, this is what this customer should be paying for our solutions, to start to calculate the white space. And then you can also take that and apply that to prospects, pure prospects, because they have some variables that are similar for getting that like customer. And ultimately what it means is we get a lot of really good buy-in from our leadership team and from the sellers, because it's based on our own data. And in doing that, they won't necessarily always agree that it's perfect, but it's been really helpful in sizing the opportunity. And if nothing else for the reps, it's helped them prioritize within their own territories. Like, this is the next customer I should account plan around. But it also, as I mentioned from the get-go, it really helps with balancing territories, because now we can make sure that we don't have a territory with, $15 million of potential, and then the territory right next to them is at 3 million. So we can balance not only just the territory planning part of it, but we can also help them with the prioritization of where to start within their book of business to go after some of that potential. So we look at workload for a rep a number of different ways. I don't believe there's any one perfect way, so we kind of use a couple of different methodologies. The first is we are conducting generally about 2 times a year a seller rep survey that ultimately looks at where they're spending their time, and then that time study then allows us to then match it with their book of business. So now we're starting to get to where they're spending their time and how much time, and we can kind of translate it to the sort of the distribution of the types of accounts that particular rep has. The other methodology that we use is we look at sort of just the number of accounts, and we kind of can balance out what we've factored as, it sometimes can be as simple as, large effort, medium effort, and small effort customers in terms of how much they rely on the rep for what they do. And then we take that and we kind of plot that out. And what generally happens is you get this, this top 15% where someone's really got a big workload. And then you have these other folks on the other end that can tend to have a smaller workload. And we look at that to really just make sure that we're taking those two tails where it kind of dips up and dips down. And then within 15%, we try to bring it back into this, plus or minus 15%. Anything above that, we try to smooth out based on the number of accounts they have and the amount of time that those customers might actually request from their sales team.
So let's take a look at a nice visual representation of what Tom was just talking about there. We'll add the slides in here. So here, Tom was describing this chart, and you'll often see this chart in discussions of territory optimization, where you have some territories that are under allocated with work. They don't have enough to do. Others have too much to do. Both of these things are suboptimal, and so smooshing these tails back into the range of variation from the average helps you recover quite a lot of sales capacity here. So this is very important. And so wanted to share this. Tom and our other panelists had some great insights here. Let's try to unpack them for a minute, Ronan, and talk through some ideas related to them. So in my view, there are two basic categories of data that we're talking about here. The first is potential, and the second is what you might call activity data. Relates to what salespeople are doing, how much work they have to do, how we can balance that, et cetera. So I want to try to pull out some actionable ideas from this information that our viewers might be able to find valuable. I'll start with potential. We'll talk about activity in a minute. And I saw three ideas kind of coming to the surface with our panel. And the first is what I call a demand proxy, using some marker for potential in an account. So we'll talk about that, and then also the value of segmentation and taking refined and more specific views as opposed to having one kind of monolithic model. And then thirdly, having a transparent approach. Tom alluded to how they use their approach for modeling workload, for example, in this, one of its hallmarks, reading between the lines, is its transparency. I think that's very valuable. Anyway, let's dive in for a minute with this idea, the concept of a demand proxy. I mean, here's a simple illustration of that. This comes loosely from the office supplies industry, where we're looking at the relationship between paperclip purchases and employees in a customer account. In this gray data set, we can see that relationship is not very closely connected. There's low correlation here. And we can take a little different view, a more refined view. If we just look at white collar employees, there's a much more direct relationship between the number of white collar employees and the amount of paper clips purchased. Hard to believe people are even buying paper clips these days, but this hopefully illustrates the idea. We're looking for an attribute or characteristic in our customer that has a correlation with sales or whatever measure of output we're attempting to connect. Typically, that's sales revenue. So curious about your thoughts on this, Ronan. This is likely something you do with your clients quite a bit, I bet.
Yeah, I think it's an area that they really struggle with. But I do like. I mean, I know maybe some of us listening might go, well, okay. In Tom's case, they did have a finite, as he described, a universe where he knew there were 19,000 potential. Well, there are 19,000 dealerships, and they know what the potential market is. But I think the principle what he outlined is a great idea, because it's using your own knowledge. It's using your own information rather than outsourcing it, which he found a bit of a struggle. So he was focusing in on the dollars of products, and then this idea of cohorts. And I think all of us who've gone through that process of trying to identify sweet spots or ideal clients will have identified some traits that are common to certain cohorts. I really like the idea of doing that, and they've systemized that. And again, the secondary piece of this, he's also matching that. We'll come to that later, to the effort as well. So they've actually defined effort into 3 blocks, which is a nice simple way of looking at it too. Large effort, medium, small. But yeah, I think most businesses can find some cohorts like that, and it could be a very good starting point to at least experiment and see, is this giving us a decent guide on the kind of potential these customers have?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is buyer segmentation. Maybe this is slightly different than the kind of segmentation our marketing function might do on our behalf as the sales organization. And Tom's illustrating this very effectively for us. So the genius in what their approach is that he's taking not a monolithic approach to measuring potential with one thing. It's, segment dependent, cohort dependent, as the term he uses. So I think the lesson is to look for those ways of combining like customers so that we can get these measures of potential, markers of potential, to be more useful to us, more correlated.
Yeah.
And then the other thing he pointed out, again, reading between the lines a little bit, but this is a nuance that's very important, I think, which is in talking about it with the sales organization, the first approach with, someone else's data that's not very accurate, the reaction is, you can guess how badly that was received. But then working with salespeople, dialing in the metrics to be more cohort specific, I get the feeling that there's real support for this model. So this is kind of what we were talking about, running about transparency, having a model that you can explain, that you can use to work with salespeople to make it more effective is very, very important.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And people always feel more involvement when there's a sense of buy-in, that they're involved in it and that they're contributing.
Yeah, good.
I just on a similar one, I really liked, I know we're alluding to it, but I really liked, again, this idea of that Louis outlined, and this idea of reverse engineering too. So again, you're involving the team, which came across strongly with all three, is that the level of team involvement. So trying to work back from the goal, almost back to the specific activities, in conjunction with doing the exercise that Tom is doing. So you're now in a sense, you're kind of coming up with multi objectives to help you just fine tune that approach.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking
that's a really
about
nice idea.
Another category of workforce metrics here, which are related to salesperson activity and the associated concept of workload and capacity. I mean, let's think about these for a moment. So all of the speakers talked about their challenges in estimating workload. Yeah, I agree with you that Louis' approach in having a salesperson actually do the reverse engineering is a great source of insight for what it takes to be successful. Also co-ops the salesperson into setting priorities based on their available time. So really creative approach here. Companies approach that in a range of different ways. I want to emphasize these four things. These aren't the only things to think about when you're estimating salesperson activity and workload and capacity. But these are things that I think we can call out today that might represent under emphasized areas for many firms. So the first is talking about response analysis. I'll explain what I mean in a moment. The second is optimizing the cost of collecting this stuff. I think too many companies ask salespeople to log a lot of information, and that comes at a great cost. I just encourage firms not to do that. Find other ways. We'll talk about this reverse engineering idea. Actually, we kind of already have. And then the notion that capacity and workload should be separate ideas. You should be able to kind of estimate both. So what do we mean by response curves running?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I always remember when I started out as in sales, we used to have a very, very simplistic approach. I don't think we were outliers, where we would just have a very linear approach to calls. They either got 4 calls or 6 calls or 12 calls a year. There was no real thought about the impact of, was 12 calls the right number? Was 6 calls the right number? It was just a convenient ABC. And we've come a long way since there. And I know your graph really does highlight the importance of understanding that there is, there's a diminishing return to that level of activity.
Yeah, let's try to illustrate this. Here's the maybe prevailing idea about sales effort, which is shown on the horizontal axis, and the outcomes we expect, which is on the vertical axis here. Here we're just looking at number of sales calls. It's easy to assume that with each sales call, we'll get an incremental piece of output or revenue in this case. In fact, it doesn't always work this way. It rarely does, in fact. We find diminishing returns when we make many more sales calls. So there's often a optimal number that we should make, for example, to get a new customer. And often these results are different by segment. I mean, these curves show different segments. And just as Tom did with potential data, we want to have some understanding of the difference in the activity needed to get the results we expect. It's not always easy to get this data with a high degree of specificity, but we should at least have a general idea here. So this is very important to think about. So we mention this because it's important to tease out the expected response from activity. It's not, we just don't want to assign activity as if the more, the better. A couple of other ideas here. Back to the slide, just to point out, we do have some modules here in that our members can take advantage of. These are free for our full members. They include the cheekily named Curve Your Enthusiasm, how to actually implement response curves to get at some of this data, and also one focused on activity. Ultimately, what we want to know is how much time do our salespeople have, not just what they're doing and how they're spending their time. Is it common in your experience for companies to confuse these two concepts, capacity and workload?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a really interesting approach. Obviously, again, Tom alluded to this, they do surveys, but I think there's this kind of concept between knowing what we know and what we do. And I think it's very important to kind of get a sense of what it is we are doing at a ground level, and where the time is being spent, because anytime I've been involved in a project where we've done that, we were always wrong. We had our assumptions and then there was the realities. And obviously the goal is to try and free up as much of that time to the highest value, which is going to be selling time. So even a better understanding of where the time goes on non-selling activities can really help that whole process of trying to define the right kind of workload for an individual.
Yeah, good. My last point with this section is to find ways to collect the information without burdening the organization. The time we ask salespeople to log activities is very expensive. I like the approach Tom suggested with a biannual survey. Well, let's move along. Let's talk about our second thing, which is territory design frequency. What we know about this is what we learned from our recent research. We asked companies, with what frequency do you design territories? With a frequency that is too infrequent, that is just right, or that is too frequent. So when firms say that they design territories with the right frequency, they're much more likely to be effective overall in achievement of the firm sales objectives. 69% of those companies did, compared to just 46% that said they designed territories too infrequently. The key thing here is there's a real advantage to having optimized territories that expresses itself in productivity. Firms with optimal territories are more productive. Plenty of evidence to suggest that. What we really want to know is, why don't people do it with the optimal frequency? And for most firms, that means doing it more often. The short answer, and we, again, from our research, firms find it disruptive to do this. And So Tom actually has some additional insight here. I'm going to play some quick remarks. This time we're just hearing from Tom about territory design frequency.
I think, annual makes a lot of sense for territory optimization because territories are connected to quotas, are tied to compensation plans for the reps. And ultimately, at some level, it's probably tied to the financial plan of the organization. So annual logically makes sense. Having said that, I think, if there were an opportunity with abandoned territories where you have turnover and the need to sort of rebalance intra-year, I think if things were a little easier to manage, all of this information and all of the inputs that go into the process, I could see organizations, including ours, doing this a little bit more frequently than the annual cadence that most of us do today. So the thing that we find that makes territory optimization really difficult is one, the time of year it's happening. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we're starting this process in August or September. We're on an annual fiscal year. And so what that means is there are going to be things that change that ultimately have to be incorporated into the next year's plan. So sometimes timing and the amount of change that happens between that August timeframe and January timeframe can throw things off. In addition to that, the data, because as I mentioned earlier, we are balancing territories with not only this customer potential or white space potential, but also revenue, and the year hasn't completed yet. So we find that we don't always have the data, so we have to do some things to manage with the data that we have. And then last but not least, the other thing that happens is that we're kind of doing this at the time that our sales leaders are deeply involved with trying to just close out the year successfully. And ultimately we're not trying to not take them offline of their day job while we really get with them and deep dive into future territories. So the timing, the data, and ultimately just the availability of our sales leaders can pose some tricky things.
So this is a pretty intimidating problem to solve here. Lots that has to come together. It's clear why many firms don't do this every year. I should point out that in our research, we did determine that an annual frequency makes sense for a very substantial percentage of firms, not all of them. But we learned, that there are, aside from just the challenges that Tom points out, there are plenty of other reasons that make designing or redesigning territories challenging. Consider just all of these circumstances, which isn't an exhaustive list, by the way, but all of these things argue for taking another look at territories. Ronan, I think the key for us is this notion of minimizing the disruption. I mean, how do we really do this? Can we call out a few of these things that are especially important for our audience to keep in mind?
And it was sorry, Bob, it was interesting because Louis, literally his last words were, moving accounts is a big deal. The disruption, it's not just the administrative task of it. There's a lot of emotion involved in all these decisions too. And I think one of the ways to mitigate that is through having a very fair and open and transparent criteria. In other words, explaining the logic behind the reasons you're doing any kind of realignment, be it major or minor. And I think that's a team sport, so involving the team, and the team is often out not just the sales team. We heard it there from the speakers themselves. You're getting to that point very often at an annual alignment. You definitely are going to be involving HR and other elements of the business. Quotas are going to be affected. So making sure that everyone is involved, and then we've talked about this quite a bit. Getting the right data to be able to back up these decisions. I think they're probably the three. The others are maybe they're self-explanatory, but those alone, if you can deal with those well, I think you can really, you can minimize it. You will never eliminate it.
Yeah, I think that there obviously a lot has to come together. Data is sort of the table stakes. You mentioned the political aspect, or I'm sorry, you used the term emotion. There's an emotional element to these decisions. And so I think that is one area that we can address as management, which is putting some rules or at least some principles around how we make these decisions that can help. I think that emotion is often tied to perceived inequity and being unfair. So rules and guidelines can help minimize that perception and eliminate unfairness. I mean, sometimes things are generally patently unfair, territories. Okay.
Yeah.
We must move on. Time is slipping away. Let's talk about our third area, which is leveraging technology. I want to point out two things from our research on this topic. The first is that not many firms are using technology effectively in their efforts to design sales territories. We know that just 27% say that they are effective in leveraging technology. But look how likely those firms are, that minority that is using technology effectively. They are almost 3 times more likely to be effective in their territory design. 74% are, compared to 23% of firms that don't use technology effectively. Just 23% of them are effective overall in optimizing sales territories. So we think technology can be an enormous boost to a firm's ability to do this. Also, I think it's worth pointing out that this is now within the grasp of many firms. It didn't used to be, but I'll let you speak to that, Ronan. I know you have some slides for us. I'll move them for you if you give me the nod.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah. So tell us what this technology can do for us.
I'm kind of biased. I'm very much a visual person. And so I've always had a bias towards visuals. But look, I don't think there's any doubt with our brain is a visual tool. I think the ability to communicate very complex decisions, which these are, through the power of maps is unrivaled. I'm not an anti-Excel sheet type of person, but when you hear customers, you can hear, we call it internally, that aha moment. Suddenly what was in a sheet is now brought alive through the power of just being able to physically see and make adjustments on the fly. I think the next obvious benefit is just the fact that you can get those kind of results that you are outlining, that we've talked about earlier, in a fraction of the time it would take to do this manually. So if these graphs were to represent with those nice little kind of blue lines across where you want all of your territories to be in terms of a balance, and we've only just picked 2 criteria, you can pick multiple criteria. It is not unrealistic to say that the time to do that can be compressed by well over 90%. I commonly hear projects that take 3 days take 30 minutes or less, 3 hours or less. So speed and I think accuracy, there's no doubt about it, where you're leveraging the power of technology. So the accuracy of the results is there. I do want to stress, and we talked about this earlier, Bob, it's not the full solution. You definitely need the people involvement, and that is another advantage of having active maps. You can involve people, you can share maps, you can get their feedback. I think what it does, though, is it takes a lot of the heavy lifting away, and it allows for these better decisions to be made faster.
Indeed. You have one more slide, Ronan. I'm going through it now.
So
this seems important.
Yeah, it is, because basically what may not be obvious to the eye, but on the left is your before and on the right is your after. So the ability, which is very important to people, to be able to look at different scenarios, different alignments, play around with different sort of alignments, share them with other team members, share them with the key stakeholders before you've pressed the final button, and to be able to see the impact of the changes before you actually make them. I think that's critical. And that's another thing that you can do that I think you know, when you compare it to a spread, it's just not the same. You're actually seeing how the borders of these territories have changed before your eyes, as well as the metrics that underlie the changes. So I think they're three very important reasons.
Yeah, good. Also, I mean, let's just acknowledge the fact that this technology used to be, I mean, it really hasn't even been around that long. It's been a matter of maybe 3 decades, 2 or 3 decades that people have even been able to do this. But it's only been in the maybe past 5 to 10 years that firms like yours have come along with affordable solutions that put the analytics within reach. If you've ever attempted to do this in Excel, you'll know what I mean. It's very difficult to do multi-objective optimization in Excel.
And I think as well, they're just so easy to use now, compared to, you don't need to be a GIS expert or an analytics expert to be able to use these tools. They're fast and they're easy to use, and that's a huge part of it.
Well, Ronan, that rounds out our third thing to emphasize in our session today, which is using the right technology. I want to try to bring us to a close with a little bit of a few summary observations. These are mine, and I'm curious, though I developed them with your help, so I shouldn't take full credit for them. But I hope we haven't left anything out. Let's cover off on some of these. First of all, obviously, data is critical. It's table stakes, you might say. We think there are 2 areas of data that make the most difference. They are being able to estimate potential and having a handle on sales response, the expected amount of activity that will get results. And I think companies should start here. My take on this is that you can start with a bad model that can be refined, and that's far superior than the lack of a model or any kind of decision rules about how you're making judgments about potential and activity. The second thing is, if you're collecting data, minimize the demands you're making on salespeople to give you that data. In fact, prepare for terrible data in response to a mandate to record every motion that the salespeople make. Instead, rely on more clever and cost-effective ways of doing this. Tom Pokornik pointed out a survey idea. We think that's great idea. Again, the notion of iterating to improve quality, build in regular assessment and course corrections to your models. Never rely on analytics alone for this kind of analysis. You need a decision maker that lives and breathes to help, and aim for transparent approaches that allow you to explain what you're up to and show your work to the salespeople who are affected. Did we leave anything out?
No, I think you and I discussed this beforehand. Whereas I do agree with you on minimizing demands on salespeople. One of the things that we talked about that we see in practice, though, is that sometimes the basics aren't collected. So, for example, I was looking at a CRM system today, and a lot of the basic information is missing. So for the kind of things that Tom alluded to that you would want to do to create cohorts just doesn't exist. We don't track industry information. We don't track what I would describe as critical information. And some of that, I think, is important that needs to be done by the salespeople, collated in the CRM to help you be able to begin to create cohorts, for example. So
yeah, the investments, there are investments required to get that data. Is the unfortunate answer. The good news is there are more places, I think, to and resources to help you get it without pestering your salespeople too much.
Yeah, that's true too.
For many. Okay, well, let's sum up. I will first of all thank my co-presenter Ronan Kilroy from eSpatial. Thank you for being here, Ronan.
Thanks,
appreciate
Bob.
your insights. And also our expert panel, Louis Morin from TELUS, Tom Pokornik from CDK Global, and Padmaja Rao from Stem Cell Technologies. Your insights are so valuable to us today. Before I let you go, I will remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association presentation is coming up on June 18th. At that time, we'll have a session on reassessing the sales tech stack in the age of AI. You can learn more about this session while you're here on the site under the Events tab. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thanks again for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.